Okay, I love this game of Are We On Yet? Oh, I'm there and so much faster than normal. Okay, excellent. So,
I'm there.
and loud. Okay. So today I want to talk about, I'm talking about identity. And identity is a really big topic and it has a lot to do with focus. So, oh, I can see. I'm focused on that hair. So it has a lot to do with focus, but it's actually the fastest way to create change in your life. So because identity is essentially how we see ourselves. And so we can identify with others, we can identify, and when I mean when we identify with others, it's because people are always mirroring us. So if I identify in a certain way, other people will show up to show me this, that I'm basically, that I'm this person. And so identity is, it's really important to understand identity, especially if you want to create change, because it is literally the fastest way to change your reality is to really go in at the identity level. So I made this little diagram because I wanted to start kind of with this understanding. So, okay, I just have to make sure you can see it. All right, so actions, this is the slowest way, right? This is where we start. Hi, Alicia. I'm glad you made it. I always love when I talk to myself. So I'm so glad you're here. So, so action. Action is where we might put in a routine and we will do the same thing over and over again. And this, so for example, maybe you want to start working out. So you start going to the gym. And so if you do this consistently, after a period of time, it creates a habit, right? So we have habits. And then this begins to be a thing that you do over and over again. But the thing about it is this actually takes a lot of willpower. So anyone who's maybe not been that enthusiastic, they had a goal they wanted to reach, but didn't necessarily like the steps they had to take, they would go in and do, so for example, going to the gym, perhaps other life things pull you away from really ever stepping into the identity of someone who, so for example, if I'm a runner, and I mean, I just run because that's what I do. I don't think, oh, I've got to run today, or I just naturally schedule it in because that is who I am. And so that is up here. So we have actions and habits, and we also have emotions, right? So these are the areas where, and I know I talk a lot about emotions, and it's because these three areas, right? Emotions, beliefs, and stories. This is the energetic sense of who we are. And so this is where we're grounded into reality, right? This is the three-dimensional. If we want to change something and we do it at the action level, we are really changing it, like we're trying to change it from our three-dimensional self. And so that, again, this is the slowest and often hardest way because this requires change. And nobody likes change because the identity is fixed in. And I'm not going to get too deeply in this because I'll do a video about identity, because identity and understanding it is really important. If you want to create a new reality and you're trying to create it from an identity that is unaligned with that reality, right? Then you struggle a lot more, and there's a lot more back and forth oscillation. So if I, for example, want to become a runner and I go in at the level of actions, but I don't identify as a runner, then now I'm just someone who has to remind myself, or again, like, oh, I've got to run. And maybe I identify myself as like someone who likes to watch TV and drink wine, then those two are not aligned. So running then becomes more like a chore. And my identity as someone who likes to drink wine and watch TV instead of run will conflict with these actions. And so beliefs is not the fastest way to create reality. It is a fast way. I mean, our beliefs reflect out into the world, but essentially, if you are not identifying with your new beliefs, then you can find in the same way that your actions will be butt up against your identity. Trying to install beliefs that don't align with your identity is a slow and can be like really like you can find yourself butting up against this. And so people who try to use affirmations or subliminals, they will see this, because if their identity is completely unaligned with the affirmations that they're trying to install, then they're going to butt up against it, right? So I can affirm all I want that I'm a millionaire, but if my life doesn't look like that and I don't internally identify as a millionaire, she doesn't know I'm live right now. So if I don't align as a millionaire internally, then it is, you're right, Tracy, it can be torture, because your unconscious will not accept it. In fact, you can end up doing more damage than good, because your unconscious is like, no, you're actually a liar. You're not a millionaire. And so it's important to understand how these all work. So we have these beliefs, and then these beliefs create a series of events in our lives, or are created by a series of events, whichever. It kind of works both ways. And so we create stories, and the stories they're subtle. So it's like, this person did this to me, nobody ever this. And so then and this also sort of aligns with the way that you can try to install beliefs. But if you are not really addressing the identity, the stories will block it, because you can identify like, I am loved, I am loved. But then when you see it in your reality that you're not, those stories come up. Nobody loves me. No one ever puts in the effort or whatever. And I understand, because I have all of these, well, not now. I mean, I still have all my own stories, but you know, I have all my own stories. And so I've eliminated a lot of them, but it really required me to really understand identity. And so I'm going to do a recode today, and chances of this being 30 minutes are pretty low, because I feel that it's really important before doing this demonstration of a recode that I actually give you an understanding of how identity works, because identity is essentially, it's a mental model. So understanding how you create identity, and that it's actually, it isn't this concrete thing, can be really fundamental to making these shifts in your life. So reality shifting in your concept of self can be really facilitated by understanding and then applying these concepts to your life. Because I can tell you that I can tell you over and over that you're limitless, and I can tell you over and over that you're creative consciousness. But if you are not able to really conceptualize this within your life, I'm just saying things to you, and your actual identity is like, no, you're not. So this is really an important thing to understand. Sorry, and I want to do a screen share in a minute, so let me just. I'm only mostly organized. I don't identify as a highly organized person every day. Some days, yes. So, okay. Understanding identity and what it is really opens you to become aware that it's actually you that's creating and changing your concept of yourself and of others. And it's happening consistently throughout our entire lives. So it's not the minute we want to manifest we do this. We are always doing this. And so let me see if I can make this work. Yes. Okay. So to give you an example of how it is that we are always changing who it is that we are, oh, and it does not want to let me share that. So let's try this. Yes, share screen. Okay, so this girl, let me see if she's gonna pop up. One of these girls is me. I hate this lag. So one of these girls is me. And I don't have any of the same emotions. I don't have the same psychology as her. It's not sharing. Thank you, ScreenYard. Okay, yes, share. All right, here we go. Technology. So one of these girls is me. We don't share the same body. We don't share the same mindset. We don't share the same emotions, psychology, even concepts of self, but she's still me. All right. So if you think about who you were when you were like 10, because that's how old I was there, you can understand that you are still you, but you are not you. Because we have this idea that our sense of self is concrete, but it's really not. It's actually very fluid. So, it's in spiritual circles, it's considered, it's what's considered Maya, right? It's the trick of the mind. And so this is where we essentially are consciousness, and we have this sense of ourselves. And so I'm going to steal some examples from Rob Scott and Bob Proctor because they're great examples and they work. And so, for example, you have a hand, but you would never say, I am hand, right? You have a hand. And if someone hit your hand, then you would say they were hitting you. But if they cut off your hand, you are still there. So you are so much more, even though your body is this physical thing, and you experience life through this, and the world is very loud. Life, current experience, it's very loud. So we think it's us. We think this is me, this is my life. But really, you are more than that. In the same way as, like I said, your life is going to get really loud if you have your hand cut off, but you are not gone, you are still there. And so, and there are actually a lot of levels about how we identify self. So for example, we identify self individually. We identify self within specific roles. We identify self within certain experiences. So romantic love me and mother love me. Both love different kinds of love, different versions of me. I would never show up as like romantic love me with my children, right? And so it's still me, but it's different versions of me, different identities. And so these are very subtle. And because of the way that we experience life and the way mental models work, we think this is just me, but it's different versions. And so we can, and I'm not going to get too in depth into this, but we can also extend our versions of ourselves. So for example, I identify when I'm in my family, I might identify individually, but when I'm with my family and we're with other families, my sense of self expands into my family, but separate from other families. And so hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And I'll probably at some point post a video really diving into this, because identity is so important, and it's really important to understand how to break out of this sense of just who you are. And so consciousness happens in levels. And again, I'm not really going to get into this too deeply because I kind of am going somewhere else with this. But so there are people who think their thoughts are them, and there's no separation between them and their thoughts. So that's level 1 in consciousness. Then there is another level where essentially you know you are not your thoughts. You understand that those are essentially a reflection of your conditioning and like beliefs and experiences throughout your life, but you don't necessarily separate from them. And then there are people who can separate themselves from them. And then there is essentially understanding that you are you, and then there's very much like a separation between you and the rest of the world. And I don't mean necessarily in your experience, because you have the ability to sort of move in, but you can kind of see yourself as more like a function of your conditioning, and you can observe your thoughts, and you can challenge those beliefs, the beliefs that may cause you to move into sort of lower states of being where you feel that you are failing in your life, or you feel that things are hard for you, because when you feel those things, you're really identifying with your experience. And so at the highest levels of consciousness, you can observe that. And so that's a lot of, you think about ice cream, you're not ice cream. Yeah, exactly. Ice cream's really great. I'm down with having ice cream in my life, but we're not ice cream. And so when you can begin to separate yourself, it's a lot easier to begin to process those emotions that you might be having, right? Like, so we store those experiences in our body, and they come up and we project them outwards into our experience. And we think like, this thing is happening to me. But really what's happening is that you're going through this, you're having this opportunity to clear this thing. And it's so much easier to clear when you can see that you are not your body, you are not these emotions. And to sort of use an example, I was clearing some emotions and like, there's ugly crying involved. And when I start, there's definitely like, I feel this, I am this. And then, or I believe this about myself because of these things. And then if I'm moving into a conscious space, I can step back and observe. And then it's like Rachelle's body is having these feelings, these sensations. Rachelle as a character essentially is believing these things about herself. And like, I can almost observe it like, wow, this is very interesting. And then you really begin to be able to step out of like, you're in the world and the world is happening to you, and you can move into this space where you see like, oh, this thing that I really hate right now is actually a reflection of something in me. And that maybe it's actually a reflection to show me that I'm really undervaluing myself. I'm really stepping into a victim identity. And so that's why I'm talking about this. So, okay. So the mental model is who we think we are. And so we not only have this sense of who we think we are, but we actually have this sense of who we think other people are. And so because we are not in their conscious experience, we predict or basically make up this model of self that they have. So who we think they are. And if you're not aware that this is happening, then one situation can move your model of someone and how you see them, and it can break that apart and cause you to see them differently. And when you see them differently, you unconsciously and very subtly move yourself into seeing yourself differently. And so this is why Neville says, don't try to change people. They're only messengers telling you who you are. Revalue yourself and they will confirm that change. And so he's talking about mental models and how they operate mirroring one another, because an angry version of me needs someone to judge and condemn. And a victimized version of me needs someone else as the perpetrator. And so anytime you are looking at someone else as the perpetrator, not only are you really in your experience, and so moving kind of into lower levels of conscious experience, but essentially you are moving yourself into this victim identity. And I mean, I'm not saying that no one ever hurts you or acts out in a way that can be hurtful or even dangerous and that it's all in your head, but I'm also saying a lot of it really is, especially in relationships. And so we can be in a relationship with, say, for example, a narcissist, but a narcissist needs the opposing position. So when you are no longer willing to be the victim of that narcissist, when you're willing to begin to observe yourself and not look at the other person, you're actually shifting your identity and you begin to move that narcissist out of position. And I know this because I've worked with people and I've showed them how this works because I've utilized this in my own life. And you change the people at work, you change the people in your relationships, you can change your relationships with your children, with your family, but it's really about looking at you and understanding what it is that you're bringing. And so the context, like I said, that I'm talking about, it's that in essence, that if this is someone you want to create a relationship with or salvage a relationship with, you really want to understand that the way that you see them is also the way that you see yourself. And so in order to shift your self-concept, that is also tied deeply into seeing other people in different ways, because I cannot possibly see myself as the creator of my life and also be the victim. And so it also really helps to understand this, because then you understand how fluid your identity really is. And when you understand and enact and apply that your identity is fluid, and one identity creates other identities to interact with, because they essentially mirror one another, then you changing your self-concept is not this big grandiose, like I need psychology or therapy for 20 years, because it's really not. It's really just a matter of turning inward and becoming more self-aware. And there are lots of like really grounded in reality examples of how we manifest people to change when we see them differently. So for example, and I don't know the name off the top of my head of the school, but I believe it's somewhere in the States. And so it was a really rough school, like the kind of place that substitutes didn't want to work, and they had a hard time finding teachers, and like there's a lot of graffiti and in-school violence. And so new administration came in, like a new principal came in, and instead of judging and condemning and treating the children like they were bad, this principal would stand at the door and meet them every day and greet them and make eye contact and see them as human beings, because a lot of these children were never seen in their lives. They were only victimized. And the only time we can ever really legitimately be an actual victim is when we are children, because we, in essence, we rely on the world to protect us. We are at our most vulnerable. Once we're adults, that's a position that we choose, because we actually have so much more power and so many more options. And so he saw each of these children for who they were, and would greet them each coming in the door, and then tell them things like, thank you for coming, like the school's a better place because you're here, not don't graffiti, and I saw you push that kid yesterday, and right? And so what actually happened was the levels of in-school violence and the incidences of graffiti, they actually went down, because instead of seeing them for their behavior, that particular administration understood how real change in other people happens. And so the children began to level themselves up to meet the expectations. So if you expect people to show up a certain way, they always will. And so now the trick here, and this is why I'm kind of talking about this before Recode, is because if you're carrying a lot of emotional baggage and a lot of triggers, like emotional wounding and triggers, then it's going to be a lot harder, because that creates the lens through which you look. And like the lens of your reality is created by your experience, and just like contact lenses, your lens is invisible to you. So imagine if you were wearing, say, like, you know, green contact lenses, and after a while, the world just looks green. And so really, when we want to manifest people, and it doesn't matter whether it's in relationship, family, job, no opportunities, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to understand and step back from yourself, recognize the identity that you are in, and then begin to shift at your level, not at theirs. And so this is kind of where I see maybe people will struggle, because they're still maybe carrying some of the judgments. And when you can eliminate that, and I've talked about this before, like moving into that neutral emotional space, because in that space, you have none of those judgments. You have none of that victimization. Everything just, there's no meaning. And so like I said, real change, this is what's facilitated when you can shift at your identity, so that you're not trying to control, you're not judging, you're not managing people, but you're changing the way that you see them. And so, as I said, that requires you to shift the emotional triggers and memories that push you into seeing them from a negative space. Because what happens is sometimes we almost can't help it, because we're driven by our unconscious. And as I've said, we are unconsciously pushed into seeing them these ways. And it's because these memories come up. And so when an emotional memory comes up, you will subtly shift from one identity, one version of yourself, to another. And, you know, this is actually often where we experience suffering, because the memory of an event or what someone did, we're carrying that emotional resonance. And so it changes our entire view of them, and it essentially wipes out all the good. And it essentially changes our ability to see any good in the future, because we now have this, like, it's like as if you're wearing contacts and somebody puts a fingerprint on it. And so now you're trying to look through these contacts, but there's a fingerprint. So now you see the world imprinted with this thing. And so we start to interact with the person, now seeing them as someone else, right? We're seeing them through the lens of these emotional traumas that we're carrying. And so there are a number of ways to do this. Recode by far is the fastest. It is not magic. It uses neuroplasticity. And because I love to pull science into this, I'm going to give you a couple of, dust on your mirror. Exactly. And so when you try to change people, it's essentially like, imagine you put on your lipstick for girls. And I mean, I don't know what, maybe guys have like hairs out of place. And so instead of fixing it on yourself, you're trying to like fix it in the mirror. And what you get is not a lot of results, but a lot of frustration. And so we essentially, like I said, we start to interact with a person, and now we're seeing them as someone different than we used to see them as. And it's not because they changed. It's because our model, our mental model of them changed. And so this in effect moves us into a different version of ourselves and a self-concept that matches how we see them. And so at the level of psychology, we often give ourselves more allowance, not to let just one event determine who we are as a person, right? So I said these horrible things, but I was tired and I was having a bad day or whatever, and not I said those horrible things because I'm a terrible person. But then we see other people, and if they do something, maybe they say horrible things, we now determine that this is who they are, not considering that maybe they also are tired. Maybe they are also having a bad day. And so a really great lecture that in my mind really kind of caused a massive shift in me is one by David Foster Wallace, or Wallace Foster. It's terrible. I can't remember his name because he's one of my favorite writers. But if you Google it on YouTube, it's called This Is Water. And in essence, it talks about how like fish don't necessarily know they're in water. And then he really sort of kind of shows you that when we are really in our experience and really identifying, yes, Tracy, you did have that dream about the mirror, and that thought came up in my mind, and I was like, my unconscious is going to have to puzzle on this because this is fascinating. But when we're really in our experience, we aren't noticing that the other person is our mirror. We see them as the other, in the same way that when I'm with my family, I identify with them. But when I'm by myself with, like, if I'm with my family and I'm with other families, I identify with them as me. But when I'm with myself individually and I'm with my family, I identify myself as separate from them. Like, the way that we conceptualize self and other is much more complex. And it's like water. And so we base a lot of it on our own biases, right? These identities that we give to other people based on our biases, our perceptions of the world, triggers, wounding. And I mean, I'm reluctant to use the word wounding because essentially you're not broken. And a wound implies that you're broken. And what really actually is happening is that you have unconscious patterns. And you're moving into these unconscious ways of being rather than an emotional gunshot wound, right? If you were told a really like dysfunctional way to play basketball, and then you were invited on a team, you wouldn't say, I need to heal myself to be a better basketball player. You would just need to learn a new way to play. And it's not different being in the world. And that's why I kind of am like using wounding, but I don't mean you're broken. I don't mean you don't have an emotional gunshot wound. You just have this way that you created of being because in the moment it protected you, but it will not get you to where you want to go. It's got you to where you are. And so the way that we can, I'll give you sort of an idea of an example of the way that we can sort of shift in and out of like seeing people and essentially like draw these conclusions based on like experiences, which in essence may not actually be reflective of that person at their core, in their heart. So for example, let's say someone you're living with, they're drinking a lot. So they drink a lot and then they sober up for a couple of weeks, but then they fall off the wagon, and you, instead of the minute they fall off the wagon, if you had a trigger around them drinking, the minute they fall off the wagon, it wipes out the 2 weeks of results that they got, because now you're back to you're just a drunk, or whatever judgment you might have around that. And that's just an example. But it's really important to understand that and to really begin to raise that level of awareness, not just of your conscious thoughts, because again, you're really only operating from 5%. And so your body is really going to tell you like, hey, I got some judgments. Hey, I identify as a victim. Hey, I identify as a whatever. And so that is really why I always stress really beginning to become embodied, because your body's going to tell you. And also a lot of ways that are some of the most effective ways to reprogram your subconscious mind are not only using the mind, they are using the mind-body connection, because your soul and your body are literally fused together. And so sometimes people, if they're using affirmations and they're not finding them useful, all they need to do is shift their physical energy, shift the energy of their meridians. And this is why things like chakra meditations or yoga can be really so effective to like start to snap things into place, because you've now enacted the mind-body connection. And so it's important to understand we are not just mind, and mind is sexy, and that is why it's sold a lot. But people who go in just at the mind, unless they already have that unconscious, that unconscious capability, they can find themselves meeting up against a barrier because their emotions are like, nope, nope. And so, like I said, again, are you surprised? I'm off topic. So it's the memory of the event, right? Of a specific event that prompts us to create these new models of someone, which then creates new models of ourselves, rather than necessarily the event itself. Which speaks to the power of managing not only presence and attention, because one of the most effective ways I have found to pull myself out of an experience that I'm not enjoying, and rather than resisting my current reality, is to just really move into presence, to really just ground myself. And I like to explain this. I've explained this to some of the people that I work with as like, have you ever walked into one of those like, I really love we have something called Fort Edmonton here near me, and it's basically an old trading fort. And so they have it all set up with original furniture. And so when you walk through, it's almost like you're stepping back in time. What doesn't work? There's that lag. So basically when I kind of move into grounding and I kind of separate myself from that experience, it's like I can look at life, and it's almost like my consciousness is peering through my eye, like my eyes like they're windows. And I know that sounds weird, but there's like a sense, oh, cleaning the mirror. Yes, you're right. It does not work at all. You still end up with lipstick on your teeth or hairs out of place. Yeah, when you really learn to ground your energy and sort of like observe yourself and observe your thoughts, then you really actually begin to, now you're no longer the character in the movie, but you're actually the author. Or if it were a video game, you're not the little guy on the screen, like dodging bullets and jumping cars or whatever game you're playing, but you are actually the person with the controls. And so again, this is why taking it all the way back to the beginning, when I talk about really understanding mental models and understanding why am I viewing this person this way? Because again, I don't mean to say it's all in your mind, because some things we really are in this three-dimensional reality. So some things are our three-dimensional reality, but they don't have to stay your three-dimensional reality if you can then take an objective look. And so, again, that's another tangent. So when it's not the event itself that affects us, it's the meaning that we give it, which then creates an emotional experience. Which then sometimes, and I've talked about this before, the emotions just trigger. It's not the thoughts. It's you've had an emotional experience that has triggered your nervous system so much that your nervous system is triggered before conscious thought happens. But conscious thought goes, ooh, I remember seeing something like this. That's what this means, whether it actually does or not. And so that is where you can end up looping. And so especially when you are like shifting your concept of self, you want to have this awareness. You want to recognize the similarity between this experience and an experience that happened a long time ago, and not because of any other reason than one is like a projection of the other. And so because memories, they're not solid. Research demonstrates that not only is memory filtered through like our biases and perceptions of an experience, but that each time we access a memory, we actually alter it based on experiences that follow and biases that we've created and maybe new beliefs. And so that's why I guess we could use the having a baby example, which, sorry, man, I'm sure you can't relate to that, maybe. But having a baby, not an amazing experience in the moment. Sorry, I'm just not that girl that thought that was super fun. But in hindsight, I can see it differently because every time I access that memory, now I have the addition of my children and the joy that they bring. So it shifts and changes basically the flavor of that entire experience. And so this is why we want to be able to put down the emotional memories if we want to see someone in a new light. Because if I keep reliving the hurt that they've done, I'm never going to see them differently. And I can consciously tell myself, like, this is how I see them, this is how I see them. But if emotionally I am not there, then I know that unconsciously that is, I'm still holding them in a mental model that is not serving me and what I want, right? It's not helpful. It might have been true in that moment. They might have really hurt you. They might have done something really, really crappy. And I mean, this is where forgiveness comes in. It's really freeing, and it's for you, because then you can choose, do I want to create a new relationship with them and potentially a deeper relationship where I actually see them? Or do I just want to forgive because I want to create that piece of myself? I don't want to be living my life completely through the lens of reliving this pain over and over. But then now I don't necessarily want to be in that person's life either. And so this is where manifesting is about choice, right? So I created my relationship back, but I'm also completely in my conscious will to decide, do I want to continue that? Maybe I decided I want my life to go a new way, and that's too much work for me that I want to put in, because it's 100% easier to manifest a new relationship than it is to shift your mental models of someone when there are emotional triggers. And okay, so so forgiveness, it creates the freedom of allowing you to put down that negative perception and not having to have that taint the rest of your life. Because the scarier, the more like scary and negative experiences you're holding on to, that like a fingerprint on your lens of your contact, it's tainting the way you see life. You're going to see life as scarier, more dangerous, no safety. And so this is true whether it's finances or relationships, or it doesn't really matter, because your self is fluid and you're always shifting and changing. You might be the smartest kid in high school, valedictorian, and then you may go into STEM sciences in a really competitive university and find you're middle or low. And so now your concept of yourself is just like completely broken open. And this is also why we never want to really cling to these identities of like, I am this or I am that, because essentially that is where the most pain can be created, because the universe is multifaceted. And so, yeah, forgiving yourself is the biggest relief. And it does essentially allow you to drop all of those negative stories, or so many of them. And so, yeah, we never want to cling to a specific identity either. That is often talked about as like small-minded, is where you're like, I am this, and that is it, because then you really close yourself off. You, in essence, close yourself off to possibility. The minute you're like, it can only be this way and no other way, it's usually because you have like, it's like you're in a box. You've created a box. And so the more fluid you are, the more you invite flow in, the more you open to possibility. And then you can have that thing that you want, but it doesn't have to be this way, because the minute you don't have to have something is almost the minute that it's open to you. And so, yeah, yes, exactly. Yes, Angie, you are what you choose today. And every moment is the chance to choose again. And so really one of the most powerful ways to shift your subconscious is to choose who you want to be, and then maybe notice all the ways that you are potentially shifting away from that. And okay, so this is kind of where the recode comes in, is because it's essentially these emotions, these emotional experiences that we cling on to that cause us to essentially kind of get caught. We get caught in this sense of like how someone else is, who we are, what life looks like. And so we want to be able to put those down. And so this is, please forgive me. This is the first time I've ever done this in a group setting. I hope that video really helped to enlighten you about how self-concept really can be moved and shifted. And it has a lot to do with not only the way we mentally see ourselves, although that is important, but also the way we emotionally experience ourselves and our concept of the people around us, which is affected, again, both by our mental and our emotional experiences that we are carrying. And so some of the features in my Thursday videos are no longer available on YouTube, but if you want to access them, you can join the Facebook group where each week I want to bring something special that will help you move forward to create what you want, and maybe move through some of the barriers that you may not know that are keeping you back. And so thanks for watching this video, and live as though you can't fail, because you are literally